Hello, everyone. I'm debating whether or not to let my cat in because she is clawing at the door. She doesn't like to be left alone. And well, you know, cats are good for keeping away mice. And I think we all know what mice have to do with this particular story. So, one of my favorite Christmas stories is E.T.A. Hoffmann's Nutcracker and Mauskönig, or rather, The Nutcracker and the Mouse King. Now, this story was written in. E.T.A. Hoffmann was born in Prussia. He also worked in Germany. So he often gets considered a German writer because his works were written in German. So, technically, that does make him German because he was working in German, but he was really born in Prussia. So, um, a lot of you know me because uh, of my fandom of Oz and Elf Like Bomb, and I couldn't help but notice that Hoffman was a guy who really followed his passions in because he loved music, he loved writing, he loved storytelling. So yeah, most of his works though date like Bomb. Most of his works date from like the last couple decades of his life. His literary works. He wrote an opera called Undine. I probably mispronounced that, but anyway, and which you know was pretty influential on some more famous composers. So yeah, I'm very I I I don't think it's too bad that music for the Nutcracker and many of his works were made after he died because I would love to hear what he thought about him. So anyway, the Nutcracker and the Mouse King was actually written for a friend of his who had children who were actually named Marie and Fritz, like the characters in the story. So yes, like the Wizard of Oz, he apparently told it or at least wrote it for these children. So there's some interesting parallels here between him and Lewis Carroll. So it's very interesting. Now, a lot of people know the Nutcracker from the ballet adaptation, and the ballet had to, in most productions, has to cuts out a lot of Hoffman's story because it's performed with dance, and you can't. And it's difficult to convey some things with dance. And in fact, even Tchaikovsky thought this is a really weird choice to make into a ballet. But they made it, he hit it happen. It didn't get well received when it first came out, but it became a classic nonetheless. And now we have Nutcrackers all over the world. But here's an interesting thing. Tchaikovsky was not the first composer to write music for the story. Earlier in the 1850s, Carl Reinecke wrote 8 pieces of music for the story. These aren't generally well known outside of people who know much about Reinecke at all. So, I didn't find out about him until 2018, 4 years ago. So really, it's kind of been my little pet project to give Reinecke some love. I love Tchaikovsky's work. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I think Give Reinecke is much better. My ideal thing would be see a movie adaptation of the Nutcracker where the music uses themes from both Reinecke and Tchaikovsky. So I want to play some Reinecke while I'm reading the story. I'm going to try to keep it turned down low so you can actually hear me over it. So, but yeah. So I'm putting my headphones on. All right. Now, this is going to be a little difficult to do because I have some. Uh, all right. There's another interesting thing about the Nutcracker, and that is that because it was written in German, there's no one plain official English version. It's been translated to English several times over the years, especially after becoming a famous ballet. If you are interested in getting a copy, please make sure that it's not a retelling, because there's a lot of retellings and picture books that say E.T.A. Hoffmann on the front when actually it's a brand new abridgment or adaptation for picture books. So I'm going to tell you that if you want to get your own copy of the book. My favorite translation is this one by Ralph Mannheim. However, it's not completely perfect. Mannheim did a great job. He also translated Neverending Story and some wonderful translations of Grimm's fairy tales, and also this book by a very popular German person called Mein Kampf. Now, when I say Mannheim is Jewish, he was not in support of what was written in Mein Kampf, but he wanted to get this part of the story out there. So there was a very interesting translator there. Susie, are you having a problem with me? Oh, you want me to just get started with the story? Yeah. So, yeah, now, the the story of the Nutcracker was originally published in 1816. That was in a magazine called Kindermärchen, which was, I guess, a book of stories for children. Then Hoffman published in a book 2 years later called the Die Serapion Brüder, or the Serapion Brethren. And what I like about that was that he wrote that as a bunch of writers who would get together and read each other their stories. Like, if you're familiar with C.S. Lewis and the Chronicles of Narnia and his friendship with J.R.R. Tolkien, you know that they were in a group called the Inklings. So this is something that was like kind of a forerunner to that. Anyways, so here we are going. Yeah, no viewers. I'm just reading this for posterity because I'm recording. Alright. Here's some music. On the 24th day of December, Dr. Stahlbaum's children were not allowed to set foot in the small family parlor, much less the adjoining company parlor, not at any time during the day. Fritz and Marie sat huddled together in a corner of the little back room. An eerie feeling came over them when dusk fell, and as usual on Christmas Eve, no light was brought in. In whispers, Fritz told his younger sister, she had just turned 7, that since early morning he had heard murmuring and shuffling and muffled hammer blows in the locked rooms. And a short while before, he confided, a small, dark man had crept down the hallway with a big box under his arm. And he, Fritz, felt pretty sure that this could only be Godfather Drosselmeyer. At that, Marie clapped her little hands for joy and cried out, "Oh, what do you think Godfather Drosselmeyer has made for us?" Judge Drosselmeyer was anything but handsome. He was short and very thin. His face was seamed with wrinkles. He had a big black patch where his right eye should have been, and he had no hair at all, for which reason he wore a beautiful white wig, a real work of art. And Judge Drosselmeyer was himself a skilled craftsman, able to make and repair clocks. When one of the fine clocks in the Stahlbaum home was sick and unable to sing, Godfather Drosselmeyer would come over, remove his glass wig and yellow coat, and put on a blue apron. For a while he would stick sharp instruments into the clock, Little Marie felt real pain at this sight, but it didn't hurt the clock in the least. On the contrary, it came back to life and made everyone happy by whirring and striking and singing merrily. Whenever he came, he had something in his pocket for the children. Now a little man who would roll his eyes and bow in a most comical way. Now a box that a little bird would hop out of. Now something else. But every year at Christmas, he took great pains to turn out a work of very wonderful artistry, so precious that the children's parents always put it away in a safe place. "Oh!" Marie cried out. "What do you think Godfather Drosselmeyer has made for us?" Fritz said it was sure to be a fortress with all kinds of soldiers marching up and down and drilling, and then other soldiers would come and try to get in, but the brave defenders would fire their guns, which would boom and thunder wonderfully. "No, no," Marie interrupted. "Godfather Drosselmeyer said something to me about a beautiful garden with a big lake in it, and lovely swans with golden necklaces swimming around in it, and singing the most lovely, beautiful songs. And then a little girl comes across the garden to the lake and calls the swans, and feeds them marzipan." "Swans don't eat marzipan," said Fritz rather rudely. "And besides, Godfather Drosselmeyer can't make a whole garden. And anyway, what good are his toys to us? They always get taken away before we know it. I like to think his Mama and Papa give us a lot better because we can keep them and do what we like with them." Then the children tried to guess what their parents had given him this time. Marie remarked that Mistress Trude, her big doll, had changed for the worse. Clumsier than ever, she kept falling on the floor, which always left nasty marks on her face. And no amount of scolding would help. She just couldn't keep her clothes clean. Marie also remembered how Mama had smiled at her for being so delighted with her doll, her Gretchen's little parasol. Fritz, on the other hand, observed that, as his father was well aware, a chestnut horse was needed for his royal stables, and that his army had no cavalry at all. So the children knew that their parents had bought them all sorts of lovely presents, and were busy imagining them. They were just as certain that the Christ child was looking on with tender, loving eyes, and that Christmas gifts, because he had blessed them, gave more pleasure than any others. The children, who kept whispering about the presents they expected, were reminded of this by their eldest sister Louise, who added that it was always the Christ child who, by the hands of their dear parents, brought children things that would give them true enjoyment, since he knew what those would be better than the children themselves. "No," big sister Louise went on, "instead of hoping and wishing for all sorts of things, they should wait quietly like well-behaved children for whatever the Christ child would bring." Marie sat deep in thought, but Fritz muttered, "All the same, I'd like a chestnut horse, some hussars." By then it was very dark. Fritz and Marie pressed close together, afraid to say another word. They had a feeling that gentle wings were passing over, and they seemed to hear beautiful music in the distance. When a flash of brightness flitted across the wall, they knew it was the Christ child flying away on glowing clouds to other happy children. At that moment, a silvery bright bell rang ding-a-ling. The doors flew open, and such a flood of light streamed in from the big parlor that the children cried aloud, "Oh! Oh!" and stood stock still on the threshold. Papa and Mama appeared in the doorway, took their children by the hand, and said, come in, dear children, and see what the Christ child has brought you." Like I said, this was published in 1816 first. So it tells what this was like in Germany. This was like the family of an upper class person. The Christ child is not baby Jesus here. The Christ child was like a kind of angelic figure, and the way they would celebrate Christmas here would be, yes, they would get the presents on Christmas Eve, and then it was followed by days of merriment and feasting, days on end. So I kind of realized that that kind of plays a role later on in the story. And because we often are viewing it through through a lens that no longer observes those, we kind of begin to we lose a little bit of the story as we go on. I'm pulling it. I pulled up a French version by Alexandre Dumas, who wrote his own kind of retelling of the story. It sticks pretty close to Hoffmann's version. It said that this was the text that they actually used when they made the ballet. So there's a picture of Drosselmeyer working, hitting at his clocks. Uh, yeah, there's Louise with Marie and Fritz together. And there's her doll that kept falling on the floor. And then there they are about to go into the parlor. Oh, oh! So on to chapter 2, The Presents. Kind reader or listener, Fritz, Theodore, Ernst, or whatever the name may be, I must ask you to think as hard as you can of your last Christmas table piled high with gifts. Then perhaps you will be able to conjure up the scene. How the children stood silent with shining eyes, and how after some time Marie heaved a sigh and cried out, "Oh, how lovely! Oh, how lovely!" And Fritz took 2 or 3 rather spectacular jumps in the air. The children must have been especially well behaved that year, for they had never before received so many splendid presents. The big Christmas tree in the middle of the room was decorated with any number of gold and silver apples, like sugared almonds, bright-colored candles, and goodies of all kinds shaped like buds and blossoms hung from every branch. But the most startling thing about this wonderful tree was that hundreds of tapers glittered like stars in its dark branches, and the tree itself, shining with an inner light, invited the children to pick its blossoms and fruits. About the tree, everything glittered splendidly. No one could even have described all those wonderful things. Marie discovered the prettiest dolls and all sorts of shiny little utensils. Best of all, a little silk dress decorated with colored ribbons had been hung up in such a way that she could examine it from all sides. And examine it she did, crying out time after time, "Oh, what a beautiful, oh, what a lovely dress! And I know for sure that I'll be allowed to put it on." Meanwhile, Fritz galloped around the table 3 or 4 times, crying out the new horse that, true enough, he had found already bridled on the table. On dismounting, he remarked that the beast was rather wild, but it didn't matter, he'd break him in. And then he reviewed his new squadron of hussars, who were admirably fitted out in red and gold uniforms, silver sables, and mounts so gleaming white that they seemed to be of pure silver. When the children had calmed down a little, they got ready to look at the picture books that lay open, showing all sorts of beautiful flowers and people clothed in many colors, and dear little children at play, all painted to look as natural as if they were really alive and talking. Well, the children were just getting ready to look at these wonderful books when the bell rang again. Knowing that Godfather Drosselmeyer would be unveiling his present, they ran to the table that had been set up beside the wall. The screen had hidden away, that had hidden it was taken away. What did the children see? On a green lawn, bright with flowers, stood a magnificent castle, with dozens of sparkling windows and golden towers. Chimes were playing, doors and windows opened, and tiny but shapely ladies and gentlemen wearing long dresses and plumed hats could be seen strolling around the rooms. In the central hall, the silver chandeliers had so many candles in them that they seemed to be all afire, and children in little skirts and doublets were dancing to the music of the chimes. A man in an emerald green coat kept appearing at one of the windows, waving his hand and vanishing, and Godfather Drosselmeyer himself, who was hardly bigger than Papa's thumb, would come out from time to time and stand at the castle gate for a while and go back in again. Placing his arms on the table, Fritz looked for a while at the beautiful castle and at the dancing, walking figures, and he said, "Godfather Drosselmeyer, let me go inside your castle." "Impossible," said the judge. And he was right, for it was foolish of Fritz to think of going into a castle that, going towers at all, was not as high as himself. This Fritz understood, but after a while, when the ladies and gentlemen continued to stroll back and forth, the children to dance, the emerald green man to appear at the same window, and heard Father Drosselmeyer to step outside the door, Fritz said impatiently, "Godfather Drosselmeyer, come out of the other door next time." "That's not possible, dear Fritz," said the judge. "Then," said head Fritz, "make the green man who keeps coming to the window walk around with the others." "That too is impossible," said the judge. "Then make the children come out," cried Fritz. "I want to look at him close up." "No, no, no, all those things are impossible," said the judge crossly. "That's how the mechanism works. It can't be changed." "Is that right?" said Fritz with an affected drawl. "It can't be changed, can it? In that case, Godfather Drosselmeyer, if all your precious little people in the castle can do is the same thing over and over again, they don't amount to much, and I don't really care for them. Only my hussars, they march forward or backward as I command, and they're not shut up in a house." With that, he ran back to the Christmas table and made his squadrons trot this way and that on the silver horses, wheel about, charge, and fire their guns to his heart's content. Marie also so quietly crept away, for she too had soon tired of watching the dolls and strolling and dancing about inside the castle, although, as she was a good, well-behaved child, she hadn't wanted to show it. Judge Drosselmeyer said rather crossly to the children's parents, "A work of art like this isn't meant for ignorant children. I'm just going to pack my castle up again." But Mrs. Stahlbaum came over and got him to show her the ingenious clockwork that moved the little figures, which meant taking the whole castle apart, putting it back together again. That cheered him up, and he gave the children some lovely brown men and women with gold faces, hands, and legs. They smelled as fragrant as gingerbread, and Fritz and Marie were delighted with them. Sister Louise had also been given a lovely dress, which she put on when her mother asked her to, and she looked very pretty in it. But when Marie was asked to put on hers, she said she'd rather just look at it for a while. She was allowed to do so. Might have noticed that we didn't quite get to one particular famous bit there. It's coming. A few illustrations forward. Right. The real reason why Marie didn't want. Alright, chapter 3, Marie's favorite. The real reason why Marie didn't want to leave the Christmas table was that she had just caught sight of something she hadn't noticed before. Fritz's hussars had been parading near the tree. When they marched away, an excellent little man came into view. He stood there quietly, as though patiently waiting his turn. He might have found fault with his build. His torso was too long and stout for his short, skinny legs, and his head was much too big for the rest of him. But to make up for these disadvantages, and the distinction of his dress showed him to be a man of taste and breeding. He was wearing a well-cut lavender hussar's jacket, with lots of white frogging and buttons, breeches of the same stuff, and the daintiest little boots that had ever graced the feet of a student or even an officer. They were molded as neatly to his dainty little legs as if they'd been painted on. Oddly enough, though, in view of these fine clothes, he had, hanging from his shoulders, a skimpy, ungainly coat that looked almost as if it were made of wood, and he was wearing what appeared to be a miner's cap. But Marie remembered that Godfather Drosselmeyer often wore a wretched-looking morning coat and a hideous cap, neither of which prevented him from being a dear, sweet godfather. Also occurred to Marie that even if Godfather Drosselmeyer were to dress as prettily as a summer man, he wouldn't be as handsome. With Marie, it was love at first sight, and the longer she gazed at the sweet little man, the more delighted she was with his good-natured face. His light green, slightly too prominent eyes were also full of kindness, and this well-curled cotton beard was most becoming, and it brought out the sweet smile of his bright red lips. "Oh, father dear," Marie cried out, "who does her little dear man by the tree belong to?" "Dear child," said Dr. Stahlbaum, "our friend here will serve you all well. He will crack hard nuts for all of you with his teeth, and he belongs to Louise as much to you and Fritz." Carefully picking him up from the table, Dr. Stahlbaum lifted his wooden cloak, whereupon the little man opened his mouth wide, revealing 2 rows of sharp white teeth. At her father's bidding, Marie put in a nut, and, Crack! The little man bit it in two. The shell fell down, and Marie found the sweet kernel in her hand. Dr. Starbaum told the children that the pretty little man was descended from the Nutcracker family, and practiced the trade of his forebears. Marie cried out for joy, and her father said, "Well, dear Marie, since you seem so fond of friend Nutcracker, he shall be entrusted to your special care, though, I already told you, Louise and Fritz must have as much right to make use of him as you." Marie picked him up and gave him nuts to crack, but she chose the smallest so the little man would have to open his mouth too wide, which did not really become him. Louise joined her, and her friend Nutcracker had to work for them both. He seemed glad to do it, for he kept smiling in the friendliest way. By that time, Fritz was tired of riding and maneuvering. Hearing the sound of nuts being cracked, he went over to his sisters and laughed heartily at the droll little man. After that, Fritz too wanted to eat nuts. Nutcracker passed from hand to hand and never stopped opening and closing his mouth. Fritz always chose the biggest and hardest nuts, and all of a sudden, crack, crack, 3 little teeth fell out of Nutcracker's mouth, and his lower jaw began to wobble. "Oh, my poor little Nutcracker!" Marie cried, taking him out of her Fritz's hands. "He's just a stupid fool," said Fritz. "Calls himself a Nutcracker, and his teeth are no good. He doesn't even know his trade, if you ask me. Give him to me, Marie. Let him crack nuts for me. Even if he loses the rest of his teeth and his jaw drops off too, who cares about a good-for-nothing like him?" Marie was in tears. "No, no," she cried. "He's my dear Nutcracker, and you can't have him. See the sad way he's looking at me and showing me his sore little mouth? You're a heartless brute. You beat your horses, and you even had one of your shoulders shot." "That's the way it has to be," said Fritz. "You don't understand these things. And the way Nutcracker belongs to me as much as you do, so hand him over." Sobbing Marie, he wrapped the wounded Nutcracker in her little handkerchief. The children's parents came over with Godfather Drosselmeyer, who, to Marie's dismay, sided with Fritz. But Dr. Stahlbaum said, "I expressly entrusted Nutcracker to Marie's care, which is obviously just what he needs. There's no point in arguing, she and no one else is in charge of him. What's more, I'm very much surprised at Fritz making demands on a man wounded in the line of duty. As a good soldier, he should know that wounded men are never expected to do active service." Fritz felt deeply ashamed. Losing all interest in nuts and nutcrackers, he slunk away to the other side of the table where, after posting the necessary sentries, he sent his hussars into night quarters. Marie, he collected Nutcracker's lost teeth and bandaged his wounded mouth with a pretty white ribbon she had taken from her dress. She rocked the poor little fellow, who was looking extremely pale and shaken, in her arms like a baby. Meanwhile, looking at the pretty pictures, the new picture book that lay there along with the other presents. She grew very angry, which was not at all like her, when Godfather Drosselmeyer laughed at her and kept asking why she was making such a fuss over such an ugly fellow. Remembering the strange resemblance between Nutcracker and Drosselmeyer, which had struck her at first since the little man said very gravely, "I'm not at all sure, dear godfather, that if you were dressed like my dear Nutcracker and were not wearing such shiny boots, I'm not at all sure you'd look as handsome as he does." Marie didn't know why her parents laughed so heartily, or why the judge went red in the face and hardly laughed at all. There may have been some special reason. All right. Taking little water breaks between the chapters here. Say the illustrator for the edition we're looking at here really did do his stuff. Chapter 4. Strange Happenings. Along the wall to your left, you enter the Stahlbaum's living room. There is a tall glass-fronted cabinet in which the children keep all the lovely presents they receive each year. Louise was still a very small child when her father had this cabinet made by a skillful craftsman, who fitted it out with such sparkling panes of glass and made the whole thing so cleverly that the contents looked almost brighter and more beautiful than when you held them in your hands. On the top shelf, beyond the reach of Marie and Fritz, were the products of Godfather Drosselmeyer's skill. The next shelf down held the picture books. As for the two lower shelves, Marie and Fritz were allowed to keep whatever they pleased there. Marie used the bottom shelf as a home for her dolls, while Fritz garrisoned his troops on the one above it. That is just what they did today, for while Fritz was installing his hussars on the higher of the two shelves, Marie put her Mistress True to one side, moved her new doll hall into the beautifully furnished room, and invited herself in to have tea and cakes with her. I've said that this room was very well furnished. And that's the truth. For my attentive reader Marie, I don't know whether you, like the little Starbaum girl, remember, of course, that she too was called Marie. I don't know, that is, whether you too have a lovely little flowered sofa, several dear little chairs, a charming tea table, and most especially, a spanking clean bed for your lovely dolls to sleep in. All those things were in the corner of the shelf, the walls of which were papered with colored pictures. You can imagine that the new doll, whose name, as Marie learned the same evening, was Mistress Clara, found her room extremely comfortable. It was getting late, almost midnight. Godfather Drosselmeyer had left long ago, and still the children couldn't tear themselves away from the glass-ring cabinet, though the mother had several times urged them to turn in for the night. "It's true," Fritz finally said. "The poor fellows, being his hussars, need their rest." With that, he retired, but Marie pleaded, "Just a little while longer. Let me stay just a little longer. Mother dear, I still have certain things to attend to, and then I'll go right after bed." Marie was a sensible, well-behaved child, so her mother felt that she could leave her alone with the toys for a while and not cause too much cause for worry. Still, to make sure that Marie wouldn't be so intent on her doll and all the other new toys that she forgot the candles around the cupboard, her mother put them all out, leaving on only the lamp, which hung from the ceiling in the middle of the room and cast a pleasantly soft light. "Go to bed soon, Marie, or you won't be able to get up tomorrow," said her mother as she went off to her bedroom. As soon as Marie was alone, she did what had been most on her mind, something that she herself didn't know why. She couldn't mention it to her mother. All the while she had been holding the wounded Nutcracker in her arms, still wrapped in a handkerchief. Now she laid him carefully on the table, unwrapped the handkerchief ever so slowly, and examined his wounds. Nutcracker was very pale, but he gave Marie a sad, friendly smile that went straight to her heart. "Dear Nutcracker," she said softly, "don't be angry at Brother Fritz for hurting you so. He meant no harm. It's just that the rough soldier's life has made him somewhat hard-hearted. Otherwise, he's not a bad boy, I assure you. But now I'm going to take the very best care of you until you're well and happy again. Your teeth will be put back in and held fast, and Godfather Drosselmeyer will set your shoulders straight. He's good at those things." Marie couldn't finish what she had to say, because the moment she mentioned Godfather Drosselmeyer, Friend Nutcracker made a horrible face, and his eyes seemed to send out green sparks. But just as Marie was beginning to be frightened, Nutcracker turned to her with his usual sad smile, and she knew what had distorted his face was the light of the lamp, flaring up suddenly in the draught. "What a foolish girl I am," she said to herself, "getting scared for no reason, even imagining that a wooden doll can make faces. But I do love Nutcracker because he's so funny and good-natured, and I will take the best care of him." With that, she put Nutcracker up in her arms, went over to the toy cabinet, bent down in front of it, and said to her new doll, "Mistress Clara, I must ask you to give up your bed to our poor Nutcracker and make do with the sofa. After all, you're bursting with health, or you wouldn't have such plump red cheeks. I hope you realize that very few dolls, even the prettiest, have such nice sofas to sleep on." Mistress Clara looked very distinguished and morose in her Christmas finery, but she didn't say boo. "But why am I making such a fuss?" said Marie. Whereupon she pulled out the bed, put Nutcracker in it gently, took a pretty ribbon that she usually wore around her waist and wrapped it around his injured shoulders, and drew the bedclothes up to his nose. "I won't have him staying with that horrid Clara," she said to herself, and moved her bed with Nutcracker on it to the shelf above, right next to the pretty visitor Fritz hussars were quartered for the night. Then she shut the toy cabinet, and then she was going into the bedroom when... Now, pay attention, children. Soft whispering and shuffling were heard around about the stove, behind the stairs, behind the cupboards. The tall clock were heard louder and louder, but it didn't strike. Marie looked and saw that the big gilded owl perched on top of it had lowered its wings in such a way as to cover the whole clock, and it was sticking out its ugly cat's head with a crooked beak. The whirring grew louder and louder, and now words could be heard. Talks, clocks, whirs softly, do not strike. Mouse King is king of hearing. Whir, whir, purr, purr. Sing him the old song. Whir, whir, purr, purr. Ring, bell, ring. Ding dong, ding dong. He won't last long. And then the clock whirred 12 times, 12 muffled whirs. Marie shuddered. She was on the point of running away when she saw Godfather Drossmar, who was sitting on the clock instead of the owl. His yellow coattails hung down like drooping wings. Godfather Drossmar, she called out. What are you doing up there? Come down and stop frightening me so, you wicked Godfather Drossmar. But then she heard giggling and squeaking all around her, followed by the sound of 1,000 little feet scampering behind the walls, and 1,000 little lights peered out through the cracks in the woodwork. It wasn't lights. Oh no! It was little sparkling eyes, and Marie saw mice peering out at all sides and squeezing through the chinks. Soon they were scampering all over the room, bigger and bigger bands of them, and in the end they formed ranks, just as Fritz soldiers did before marching off to war. We thought they were funny, and since she did not, like some children, have an inborn horror of mice, she would have lost all fear had she not suddenly heard a piercing shriek that sent shivers down her spine. What did she see then? Leave me, dear Rita Fritz. I know you're as brave as the wise and fearless Field Marshal Fritz Stahlbaum, but if you had seen what Marie saw then, you'd have run away. I even think you'd have jumped into bed and pulled the covers high over your ears. But poor Marie couldn't do that because now, listen, dear, her children, right in front of her feet, sand and lime, crushed stone came gushing out of the floor as though driven by some underground force, and 7 mouse heads with 7 sparkling crowns rose up, squeaking and squealing hideously. Soon the mouse's body, to which the 7 heads were attached, worked itself up through the floor, and this enormous mouse, crowned with 7 diadems, was hailed by the entire army, cheering with 3 loud squeaks. And then the army set itself in motion. Hop, hop, trot, trot, heading straight for the toy cabinet, straight for Marie, who was standing right next to it. Marie's heart beat so hard with fear and horror that she thought it would jump out of her body and she would die. But then she felt as if her blood was standing still in her veins. Close to fainting, she reeled backward, and then, crash! The glass pane she had struck with her elbow slivers to the floor. For a moment she felt a stinging pain in her left arm, but suddenly her heart was lighter. She no longer heard the squeaking and hissing. Although she was unable to look, it seemed to her that the mice had been frightened by the noise of the shattering glass and crept back into their holes. But what now? Right behind Marie, strange sounds were heard in the cabinet, and delicate little voices whispering, "Awake! Awake! On to the fight this very night! Awake! Awake!" At the same time, there was a delightful sound of bells. "Oh, that's my little music box!" cried Marie happily, and she jumped to one side. Then she saw the strange glowing-sided toy cabinet. The whole population seemed to be on the move. A number of dolls were running in all directions, thrashing about with their little arms. All at once, Nutcracker sat up, threw off his blanket, and jumped out of bed with both feet at once, shouting at the top of his lungs, "Crack, crack, crack! Ugly, stupid mice! We'll beat them blue and black! We'll squash them all at lice! Crack, crack, crack!" With that, he drew his little sword, swung it through the air, and cried, "My dear vassals, friends and brothers, will you stand by me in this bitter battle?" Instantly, 3 scaramouches, a pantaloon, 4 chimney sweeps, 2 zither players, and a drummer shouted, "Yes, your lordship, we will follow you through thick and thin, to death, and victory and battle." Whereupon, imitating the intrepid Nutcracker, they jumped from the upper shelf. It was easy enough for them to jump, for they were dressed in silk and wool, and besides, there was nothing much inside them but the cotton and sawdust, so they plumped down like sacks of wool. But poor Nutcracker would certainly have broken his arms and legs, because, just imagine, it was nearly 2 feet from the shelf where he had been standing to the lowest one, and his body was as brittle as if it had been made of linden wood. Yes, Nutcracker would undoubtedly have broken his arms and legs if, just as he leaped, Mistress Clara had jumped from the sofa and caught the hero, drawn sword in all her arms. "Ah, my dear sweet Clara," cried Marie through her tears, "how unkind I was to you! I'm sure you are perfectly willing to give poor Nutcracker your bed." But Mistress Clara, pressing the young hero to her silken bosom, said, "Oh, my lord, I beseech you, sick and wounded as you are, go not into the perilous battle." See how your brave vassals are mustering their forces, eager for the fray and confident of victory. Scaramouche, Pantaloon, Chimney Sweep, Zither Player, and Drummer are already below, and the banner bearers here on my shelf are already on the move. I entreat you, my lord, to rest in my arms, or to look down upon your victory from the brim of my plumed hat. So spoke Clara, but the Nutcracker was so restive and flirted about so with his legs that Mistress Clara had to put him down on the floor. He knelt graciously and whispered, "My lady, the favor you have shown me will be ever present on my mind on the battlefield." Clara bent low, took hold of his arms, lifted him gently, quickly undid her spangled girdle, and tried to put it around his shoulders, but he took 2 steps back, laid his hand on his breast, and said solemnly, "Dear lady, do not waste this mark of favor upon me, for—" He stopped, gave a deep sigh, quickly tore from his shoulders the ribbon Maria tied it around him and pressed it to his lips, put it on as a token, and bravely brandishing his bare sword, jumped as nimbly as a bird over the ledge of the cabinet to the floor. You have surely observed, dear reader, that Nutcracker, even before fully coming to life, had been well aware of Marie's love and regard for him. Of course, it was only because he had become so fond of Marie that he hadn't wanted to accept Mistress Clare's ribbon, sounding pretty as it was. Faithful Nutcracker preferred to wear Marie's simple little ribbon. But what was going to happen now? The moment Nutcracker jumped, the squeaking and squealing started in again. Under the big table, the murderous hordes of mice came to a halt, and over them all towered the hideous mouse with 7 heads. What will happen now? There's been some talk that Clara and Marie swapped names in different versions, and I think that the name Clara may have come from the doll here, and it wasn't the only time Hoffmann used the name Clara in his works. There's also Clara in his famous story, The Sandman. But the name Clara first came with the first production of the ballet, and the reason why I've never been able to discover, but my theory is that the choreographer of the ballet, who of course put together the story, was Marius Petipa, who had a famous ballerina daughter named Marie, and he did not want to basically make people think, oh, he made a ballet about his daughter, so he went with the name Clara instead. So that is how the name Clara got introduced to the Nutcracker, and well, it's stuck around in different adaptations ever since. Alright, I got a little bit more music to play here. Chapter 5, The Battle. "Dusty Vassal Drummer," cried Nutcracker in a loud voice, "sound the advance!" Whereupon the drummer began to ply his drumsticks so skillfully that the windows of the toy cabinet rattled and resounded. A cracking and clattering were heard from inside, and Marie saw the lids of all the boxes where Fritz's army were quartered for the night burst open. Soldiers climbed out and jumped to the bottom shelf, where they formed ranks. Nutcracker ran back and forth, shouting words of encouragement to the troops. "Why doesn't that dog or trumpeter bestir himself?" he cried angrily, entering the Pantaloon, whose long chin was wobbling badly and who turned deathly pale. Nutcracker said bravely, "General, I know how brave and experienced you are. What's needed here is a quick eye and the ability to take prompt action. I put you in command of our cavalry and artillery. You won't need a horse. You got really nicely on those long legs and it's quite afraid." Pantaloon put his long bony fingers in his mouth and blared at his piercing as 100 trumpets. A neighing and stamping were heard in the cabinet, which dragoons and cuirassiers, and most particularly his shiny new hussars, came marching out and halted on the floor down below. With hot banners flying and bands playing, regiment after regiment marched past Nutcracker and massed in the middle of the room. Fritz's artillery came clanking past. A few moments later, the guns were going boom, boom, and we saw snowballs in the serried ranks of the mice, who were spattered with white powder which made them feel very sheepish. But the worst damage was done by a battery of heavy guns set up on his footstool, which fired jawbreakers, boom, 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 in quick succession at the mice, many of which were laid low. The mice advanced irresistibly and overran some artillery positions. Such was the confusion and such was the smoke and dust that Marie could hardly see what was going on. But this much was certain. Both sides fought with grim determination, and for a long while victory hung in the balance. The mice brought more and more troops, and the little silver pills that they heard powerfully and accurately with their slingshots penetrated even to the brass flying cabinet. Caroline troops set about in despair, wringing their hands till they were sore. Die, the most beautiful of dolls, cried Taylor. Die in the bloom. Was it to perish within these four walls, I plead? I have preserved my youthful bloom down to years. Then they fell on each other's necks and cried so loud that they could be heard above the dinner battle. For the listener, you can have no idea the hubbub that now broke loose. Biff, boom, Taliban with their guns and muskets. And through it all the king of mice and his henchman squint and screamed. Nutcracker's mighty voice could be heard shouting useful orders, while he himself could be seen striding among his battalions in the thick of the fire. Pantaloon had led several brilliant cavalry charges and carried himself with glory. But Fritz's hussars were bombarded by the mouse artillery with nasty foul-smelling pelts that made horrid spots on the liberated jackets. After that, they lost all desire to advance. Left, march! Cried Pantaloon. And the enthusiasm being released, he cooed about word to the left. As soon as his cuirassiers and dragoons, in other words, they all climbed had marched on the corner. This exposed the battery on their footstool. It wasn't long before a large body of very ugly mice attacked so ferociously that the whole footstool, guns, gunners, and lily all toppled over. In consternation, Nutcracker ordered his right wing to fall back. And Smith sort of like, you, Fritz, knows that falling back is pretty much the same as running away. I'm sure you feel as bad as I do about the whole misfortune of these going to Nutcracker's army. But put your eyes from the sorry situation, turn to the left, leading the Nutcracker's army, where things are still going well, and there is still ground for hope. In the heat of battle, masses of mouse cavalry had been quietly emerging from under the clear-chested dwarves and themselves with burly carrying sweets on the left wing of Nutcracker's army. But what resistance they encountered? Slowly, because of the difficult terrain, the ledge of the glass-fronted cabinet had to be negotiated. The Banner Regiment, led by two Chinese emperors, had advanced in form to square. These intrepid and magnificently uniformed troops consisted of guards, cavaliers, huntresses, barbers, harlequins, cupids, lions, tigers, and monkeys. These fought with coolness, courage, and perseverance. With their Spartan bravery, this elite regiment would have wrested their victory from the enemy, and I very much the captain leaping to their afraid, bitten the head off of the Chinese emperors, who had fallen and crushed two princesses and monkeys. This created a gap through which the enemy advanced. I soon the whole Banner Regiment was bitten to pieces, but the enemy gained little by their fiendish cruelty, for every time mouse cavalry noticed and bit one of their valiant adversaries through the middle, a pointed blade was stuck in his throat, and he died on the spot. This was little help to Nutcracker's army, which, having once begun to fall back, retreated farther and farther with greater and greater losses until the unfortunate Nutcracker found himself hard against the toy cavalry with a handful of followers. Brave the reserves, he cried. Pantaloon, Skirmish, Runner, where are you? You're still hoping for fresh troops from the cabinet. At Q&F, a few brown men with gold faces, hats, and helmets came out. But they wielded their swords so clumsily that, far from hitting the enemy, they knocked off General Nutcracker's cap. And it wasn't long before the enemy chasseurs had bitten their legs off, and toppling over, they killed a number of Nutcracker's men. Him down on all sides, Nutcracker was in dire peril. He tried to jump over the ledge of the toy cabinet, but his legs were too short. Clara and Trude were lying in a faint and could not help him. Hussars and dragoons nimbly passed him into the cabinet. And while in despair he shouted, "A horse! A horse! My kingdom for a horse!" At the moment, two musketeers seized him by his wooden cloak, his wicked triangulated from 7 throats, and the king of mice charged him. Marie was beside himself. "Oh, my poor Nutcracker! My poor Nutcracker!" she sobbed. Without quite knowing what she was doing, she took off her left shoe and flung it with all her might into the thick of the enemy, hoping to hit their king. At that moment, everything vanished from Marie's sight. She felt a sharp pain in her left arm and fell to the floor in a faint. Okay. So yeah, that is basically most of Act 1. that we just read over there. So you might wonder what happens next. Chapter 6, Marie's illness. Alright. When Marie awoke from her deep, death-like sleep, she was lying in her little bed. The sun was shining into the room, sparkling on the ice-coated window panes. A strange gentleman was sitting beside her, but she soon recognized him as Dr. Windlestone. "He's awake," he said softly. Her mother came over and gave her an anxious, questioning look. "Oh, mother dear," Marie whispered. "Have all the nasty mice gone away? Was Nutcracker saved?" "Don't talk such nonsense, child," said her mother. "What have mice got to do with Nutcracker? Oh, you naughty child! We've been so worried about you. That's what happens when children are headstrong and disobey their parents. Last night you stayed up till all hours playing with your dolls. You were sleepy and a mouse may have come out and frightened you, though I can't believe we have any of those in the house. Be that as it may, you stuck your arm through the glass of the toy cabinet and cut it so badly that Dr. Windlestone, who has taken several pieces of glass out of the wound, says that if an artery had been cut, you'd have been left with a stiff arm for life, or might have even bled to death. Thank heaven I woke up at midnight and wondered where you were. I went into the living room and found you lying beside the cabinet in a faint, bleeding terribly. I was so frightened that I almost fainted myself. There you lay, and all around you I saw foot soldiers, lots of dolls, broken banners, and gingerbread men. Nutcracker was lying on your bleeding arm, and your left shoe was on the floor nearby. Oh, Mother! Mother!" Marie broke in. "There had just been a big battle between the dolls and mice. The reason I was so scared was that the mice were going to capture poor Nutcracker, who was in command of the dolls. So I threw my shoe at the mice, and after that I don't know what happened." Dr. Windlestone gave Marie's mother a meaningful look, and she said softly to Marie, "Never mind now, dear child. Don't worry. The mice are all gone, and the Nutcracker is safe in the toy cabinet." Then Marie's father came in and had a talk with Dr. Windlestone. He felt Marie's pulse, and she heard some talk of wound fever. He had to stay in bed and take medicine, and that went on for several days. Though, apart from some slight pain in her arm, she didn't feel sick or uncomfortable. She knew that Nutcracker had come out of the battle safely, and sometimes she seemed as if in a dream to hear him saying to her quite distinctly, "Marie, dearest lady, I am deeply indebted to you, but you can do even more for me." She wondered what that might be, but in vain. She couldn't think of anything. She couldn't play properly because of her sore arm, and when she tried to read or leaf through her picture books, everything looked so hazy that she had to stop. Time hung heavy on her hands, and she could hardly wait till nightfall, because then her mother sat down beside her bed and told her beautiful stories. She had just told the excellent story of Prince Facaridin when the door opened and Godfather Drosselmeyer stepped in, saying, "It's high time I saw for myself how my poor little Marie is getting along." The moment Marie saw Godfather Drosselmeyer in his short yellow coat, she seemed to have seen Nutcracker fighting his losing battle with the mice, and without thinking she cried out, "Oh, Godfather Drosselmeyer, how ugly you were! I saw you sitting on the clock tower with your mice to keep them from striking aloud, because that would have scared the mice away. I heard you calling the king of mice. Oh, why didn't you come to Nutcracker's help, you nasty Godfather Drosselmeyer? It's all your fault that I hurt myself and I have had to lie here sick in bed." Marie's mother was horrified. "Dear child," she said, "what are you talking about?"
Thinking about going solar? Before you do, see what others paid for 3 to 10 kilowatt systems in your...
But Godfather Drosselmeyer made strange noises and said in a rasping, monotonous voice, "Pendulum had to whir, softly purr, and couldn't strike. That's how pendulums are. But bells are ringing, ding dong, bing bong, bing bong, dogger, don't be frightened. Bells are ringing out loud and long, chase the king of mice away. Out comes flying black and gray, pick, peck, pick, and peck. Bells are ringing, clocks are whirring, pendulum upward." Snick and snack, whimper, snick and snack, whimper. Marie stared wide-eyed at Godfather Drosselmeyer because he looked entirely different and much uglier than usual, and was moving his right arm back and forth like a marionette. She would have really been afraid of him if her mother hadn't been there, and if Fritz, who had turned up in the meantime, and interrupted him with a loud laugh and cried out, "Goodness gracious, Godfather Drosselmeyer, you're really funny today. You made me think of the temple jack I threw behind the stove the other day." But the children's mother said very gravely, "Dear Judge Drosselmeyer, what a strange rigmarole. What is the meaning of it all?" "My word," said Drosselmeyer, laughing. "Didn't you know my pretty watchmaker song? I always sing it to little patients like Marie." And with that, he sat down at Marie's bedside and said, "Don't be cross with me for not putting out all 14 of the Mouse King's eyes. That wasn't possible. Instead, I brought you something that will really give you pleasure." With that, he reached into his pocket, and guess what he took out? Nutcracker, whose lost teeth he had put back in very neatly and firmly, and whose broken jaw he had fixed as good as new. Marie cried out for joy, but her mother said with a smile, "You see how good Godfather Drosselmeyer is for your Nutcracker." "And, Marie," the judge broke in, "you'll have to admit the Nutcracker is no great beauty. Now, if you like, I shall tell you how such ugliness came to his family." "Oh, yes, it's been handed down from generation to generation. Or maybe you already know the story of Princess Perlipat, the witch mouse rings, and the clever clockmaker." Hey, Godfather Drosselmeyer," Fritz interrupted. "You put Nutcracker's teeth in just right, and his jaw is as wild as it was, but why has he got a sword? Why haven't you given him one?" "My dear boy," said Drosselmeyer testily, "you always have to complain. Why should I worry about Nutcracker's sword? I've cured his bodily ills. It's up to him to find himself a sword if he wants to." "That's a fact," said Fritz. "If he's worth his salt, he'll get himself the weapons he needs." "All right, Marie," the judge went on. "Tell me if you know the story of Princess Perlipat." "No, I don't." "Oh, tell it, Godfather Drosselmeyer." "I hope," said the child's mother, "I do hope, dear judge, that this story won't be as gruesome as your stories usually are." "Oh, no, dear lady," said Drosselmeyer. "On the contrary, this is a fairy story." "Oh, tell it, dear Godfather," the children cried, and the judge began. All right, though, that is going to be where I'm going to end that for today because, well, while this isn't a super long book, I've about read, close to half here of the text. So, we'll see next week. I have a job interview tomorrow, and I'm also looking up on doing a remote position. So, hopefully between those two, I'll have employment again soon. And, but that's going to mean I'm probably not going to be able to stream at 3 p.m. on Wednesdays like I had already said, but I'll try to find time to stream again. I mean, if I know I might not be able to do it, if I might go ahead and do it more this week. So, thanks for watching. I hope I've entertained you with the original version of the Nutcracker as translated by Ralph Manheim. And I hope you learned a few things because, frankly, I find this fascinating how there were with Reineke's music, Alexandre Dumas's version, the various translations that have been over the years. So, thanks for watching, and, well, I'll see you next time when we'll get into the Tale of the Hard Nut. One of the little things that definitely gets left out of a lot of Nutcracker adaptations. Alright, thank you.